Commander Vorithsek stood at the observation deck of the human carrier and watched the stars pass by. He had served in 42 planetary campaigns across 3 decades. He had seen worlds burn. He had ordered the deaths of millions. In all that time, he had never once felt his hearts beat faster or his hands shake. His species, the Valanthi, had removed such weaknesses long ago. The Valanthi were tall and thin, with gray skin that shifted colors based on temperature. They had 4 arms and eyes that could see in complete darkness. But their greatest achievement was not physical. It was mental. Thousands of years ago, their scientists had found the parts of the brain that created fear, anxiety, and panic. They removed them. Every Valanthi child was born without the ability to feel terror. This made them perfect soldiers. Vorithsek turned away from the window and walked through the human ship. Everything about it felt wrong to him. The hallways were too narrow. The air was too warm and carried strange smells. Worst of all, it was loud. Humans talked constantly. They laughed. They shouted. They played music. The Valanthi operated in near silence, communicating through precise hand signals and data transfers. These humans were chaos given form. He had been assigned to this vessel 3 days ago. The Hegemony High Council had ordered him to serve as a liaison officer with the Human Federation. Both species faced a common enemy now. The Devourer swarm had emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies. They consumed everything in their path. Planets, ships, stations, entire star systems. They did not negotiate. They did not stop. They simply ate. The swarm had already destroyed 4 Valanthi colonies and 7 human worlds. Neither species could defeat them alone. So an alliance had been formed. Vorithsek did not like it. But he understood the logic. Survival required cooperation. He found the bridge and stepped inside. The room was filled with humans working at their stations. They looked up at him with curiosity. Some smiled. Others nodded. One young officer actually waved at him. Vorithsek did not respond. He simply observed. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the center chair. He was a man of average height, with short brown hair and tired eyes. He wore the same uniform as his crew, with no special decorations to mark his rank. This confused Vorithsek. A Valanthi commander would wear armor that showed every battle, every kill, every honor earned. Morrison looked like any other human. "Commander," Morrison said, standing up. "Welcome to the Relentless. I hope you're settling in okay." "I require nothing," Vorithsek replied. "I am here to observe and report. You may continue your duties." Morrison smiled. It was a strange expression. The Valanthi did not smile. "Well, you're welcome to observe from here anytime. We're about 6 hours from the rendezvous point. The full fleet will gather there before we move on the swarm." Vorithsek nodded and took a position near the wall. He watched the humans work. They were inefficient. They stopped to talk to each other. They made jokes. One officer spilled a drink, and others laughed while she cleaned it up. On a Valanthi ship, such behavior would result in disciplinary action, yet something nagged at him. Despite their chaos, the humans moved with a certain rhythm. They seemed to know what each other would do before they did it. When an alarm sounded briefly, every person reacted in unison, then relaxed together when it proved false. They were messy, but they were synchronized. A young woman approached him. She had dark hair pulled back and wore the insignia of a sergeant. Her name tag read Lawson. "You're the Valanthi observer, right?" she asked. "I'm Amy Lawson, Marine Division. Thought I'd introduce myself since we might be fighting together soon." "That is likely," Vorithsek said. Amy waited for more. When nothing came, she laughed softly. "You guys really don't do small talk, huh? I do not understand the purpose of conversation without information exchange." "The purpose is connection," Amy said. "Getting to know each other. Building trust. Trust is established through demonstrated competence, not words." Amy tilted her head. "Maybe. But words help too." When you know someone's story, you fight harder for them. She shrugged. Anyway, welcome aboard. If you need anything, just ask. She walked away. Voreth Sek watched her go and felt something he could not name. Not an emotion. The Valanthi did not have those. But something like curiosity. Over the next several hours, he wandered the ship. He observed the humans eating together in large groups, sharing food from each other's plates. He saw them exercising in the gym, pushing their bodies until they collapsed, then helping each other up. He found a room where off-duty soldiers watched a story on a screen. Some of them were crying. Others were cheering. Crying. The Valanthi did not cry. They had no tears. They had no need for them. Voreth Sek returned to his assigned quarters and began his first report to the hegemony. He wrote about the human ship's specifications, its weapons, its crew size. But he paused when he tried to describe the humans themselves. They were weak. Their bodies were fragile. Their minds were clouded by emotion. They wasted time on meaningless social rituals. By every measure the Valanthi used, humans were inferior warriors, and yet, something about them made Voreth Sek uneasy. He had studied their war records. Humans had fought each other for their entire history. They had invented weapons capable of destroying their own planet. They had used them. They had survived anyway. They spread across the stars not through careful planning but through stubborn refusal to stay home. He thought about what Amy Lawson had said. When you know someone's story, you fight harder for them. The Valanthi did not fight for stories. They fought because the calculations showed it was necessary. They advanced when the odds favored success. They retreated when losses became unacceptable. It was simple. It was logical. It was correct. Voreth Sek finished his report and sent it. He lay down on the human bed, which was too soft, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow they would meet the full fleet. Soon after, they would engage the swarm. He had no doubt about the outcome. The mathematics were clear. The Valanthi would perform their role with precision. The humans would do whatever humans did. Victory or defeat would follow from the numbers. What he did not know, what he could not have known, was that the numbers would lie, that everything he believed about warfare was about to be destroyed, that in the chaos of battle, he would witness something that would change him forever. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the stars passed by in silence, and Commander Voreth Sek did not dream. The Valanthi had removed dreams too. The fleet gathered at Kepler Station, a massive structure that orbited a dying star. 200 ships from both species hung in the darkness like a cloud of metal and fire. Voreth Sek stood on the bridge of the Relentless and watched the tactical display. The plan was simple: strike the swarm's forward fleet, destroy their supply lines, and push them back toward the outer rim. The Valanthi had calculated a 73% chance of success with acceptable losses. Acceptable meant less than 20% of the fleet. The hegemony considered this excellent odds. Captain Morrison stood beside him, arms crossed, staring at the same display. "Quite a sight," he said quietly. "Biggest fleet humanity has ever assembled." "It is sufficient for the task," Voreth Sek replied. Morrison glanced at him. "You really don't feel anything looking at this? All these ships, all these people, about to fight for survival? Feeling would not change the outcome. Emotion is inefficiency." Morrison nodded slowly. "Maybe, but it's also why we're here." Before Voreth Sek could ask what he meant, the alarms began. The swarm came out of nowhere. They had been hiding in the radiation of the dying star. Invisible to sensors. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. The tactical display turned red as enemy signatures filled every corner of the screen. "All hands, battle stations," Morrison shouted. The bridge exploded into activity. "Signal the fleet. Defensive formation Delta." Voreth Sek watched as the fleet tried to reorganize. The Valanthi ships moved with perfect precision, forming protective clusters exactly as doctrine demanded. The human ships were slower, messier, but they moved. Then the swarm hit them. The flagship, a massive Volanthi dreadnought called the Eternal Logic, was the first to fall. A wave of swarm ships crashed into it like a living wall. The dreadnought's shields held for exactly 4 seconds before collapsing. The ship broke apart in a flash of white light. 3,000 Volanthi died in an instant. Vorithsek watched the numbers on his tactical display. 12% losses. 18%. 23%. The threshold had been crossed. Volanthi doctrine was clear. When losses exceeded acceptable parameters, retreat was mandatory. Survival required preservation of forces for future engagements. He opened a channel to the Volanthi commander. Fleet losses exceed acceptable levels. Doctrine requires withdrawal. The response came immediately. Acknowledged. All Volanthi vessels. Execute strategic retreat. Regroup at coordinates 7 Alpha. The gray ships began to turn away from the battle. They moved in perfect formation, exactly as trained. Vorithsek felt nothing about this. It was correct. It was logical. Then he looked at the human ships. They were not retreating. The Relentless shook as weapons fire struck her shields. Morrison gripped his chair and shouted orders. All batteries, focus fire on the lead swarm carriers. Fighter squadrons, launch immediately. Give them everything we've got. Captain, Vorithsek said, your losses are severe. Retreat is the logical option. Morrison turned to him. His eyes were strange. They burned with something Vorithsek had never seen before. We're not going anywhere. We did the business. We did business. You will die. Maybe. But those things killed 6 million people on New Brisbane. They killed my sister and her kids. Morrison turned back to the display. We don't run from them. Ever. The human ships charged forward, not in perfect formation, not according to any doctrine Vorithsek recognized. They simply flew straight at the swarm with every weapon firing. On the communication channels, Vorithsek heard human voices. They were not calm status reports like the Volanthi used. They were screaming, crying, laughing. One pilot was singing. A small fighter, badly damaged, flew directly toward a swarm carrier. Its pilot was a young man named Danny Vance. Vorithsek had met him briefly. He had seemed unremarkable. Now, his voice came over the radio. Flight control, this is Vance. Engines are gone, life support failing. I'm not going to make it back. Danny, eject, someone responded. We'll pick you up. Negative. I've got one last shot. I'm taking it. The fighter accelerated. It passed through the swarm carrier's shields, which were designed to stop weapons, not ships. Danny Vance flew his broken fighter directly into the carrier's hangar bay and detonated his remaining missiles. The carrier exploded. The chain reaction spread to 2 others nearby. In one moment, a single dying human had destroyed 3 enemy vessels. The radio was silent for a moment. Then someone said, "For Danny," and the humans fought harder. Vorithsek watched Sergeant Amy Lawson on a video feed from the Marine deck. She was addressing her soldiers before they launched to board a damaged swarm ship. "Listen up," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "I'm scared." "You're scared. That's okay. We're supposed to be scared. But those things out there want to eat our homes, our families, everything we've ever loved. And I say we don't let them." The Marines cheered. They actually cheered. They were about to board an enemy vessel filled with monsters. And they were cheering. "We fight," Amy continued. "We fight until we can't anymore. And when we fall, we make sure we take as many of them with us as possible. Not for glory, not for medals. For everyone who can't fight. For everyone depending on us. Let's go." They launched. Vorithsek tracked their progress. The Marines breached the swarm vessel and fought through corridors filled with horrors. They lost half their number in the first 10 minutes. They kept going. They planted explosives in the ship's core and fought their way back out. Amy Lawson was the last one through the airlock, dragging 2 wounded soldiers behind her. The swarm ship exploded moments later. By the time the battle ended, the human fleet had lost 42% of its ships. By Volanthi standards, This was catastrophic defeat. The humans should have been broken. Instead, they gathered their survivors. They counted their dead. They held a brief ceremony where they read names and shed tears. And then Captain Morrison stood before his remaining crew and said 4 words. "We stopped them here." The humans cheered again. They had lost nearly half their fleet, and they cheered. Vorithsek returned to his quarters and tried to write his report. His hands trembled. He stopped and looked at them. Valanthe did not tremble. It was not possible, but his hands would not stop shaking. He sat in the darkness of his room and thought about what he had seen. Humans flying broken ships into enemy vessels. Humans screaming in rage as they charged impossible odds. Humans holding each other as they died, refusing to let go. Something had happened to him during the battle. Something he could not name. It felt like a crack in the walls he had lived behind his entire life. A small crack, but a crack nonetheless. He did not know it yet, but it was the beginning. The first tiny fracture in everything he believed. The first moment when Commander Vorithsek began to feel something that his species had forgotten long ago. It would not be the last. The days after the battle were strange for Vorithsek. The Relentless limped through space toward a repair station, and he walked its damaged hallways like a ghost. He could not stop thinking about what he had seen. He could not stop the questions that filled his mind. He began to study the humans, not their technology or their tactics. Those were simple enough to understand. He studied the humans themselves. He watched them. He listened to them. He asked them questions that seemed to confuse them. His first interview was with Chief Medic Laura Kim. She was a small woman with tired eyes and gentle hands. She had worked for 30 straight hours after the battle, saving whoever she could. When Vorithsek found her, she was sitting alone in the medical bay, staring at nothing. "May I ask you questions?" Vorithsek said. Laura looked up at him. She seemed surprised. "Sure. Pull up a chair. I do not require sitting. It wasn't for you. It's just what people say." She almost smiled. "What do you want to know? Why did you work for 30 hours? Your efficiency would have decreased significantly after the first 12. The logical choice would have been to rest and return fresh." Laura was quiet for a moment. "Because people were dying. People die in war. This is expected. Expected doesn't mean acceptable." Laura's voice was soft but firm. Every person on those tables was someone's child, someone's friend, someone's love. They had stories, dreams, people waiting for them back home. I couldn't just stop because I was tired. Not while I could still save one more. Vorithsek processed this. "You caused yourself harm to save others. This seems inefficient." "Maybe, but I'd do it again." Laura met his eyes. "Wouldn't you? If it was someone you cared about?" The Valanthe did not care about individuals. They cared about the collective. But Vorithsek found he had no answer. His next interview was with Corporal Ryan Ortiz. The young man had a bandage around his head, and his arm was in a sling. During the battle, he had carried his wounded friend 2 miles through a burning ship to reach the escape pods. "Why did you do it?" Vorithsek asked. "The calculations show you had a 17% chance of survival with the additional weight. Alone, you would have had 63%. Ryan stared at him. "I wasn't going to leave Dustin. He was unconscious. He would not have known. I would have known." Ryan's voice was hard. "I've known Dustin since we were kids. We grew up together. Joined the Navy together. I promised his mom I'd look after him. You think I'm going to break that promise because of some numbers? Numbers are truth. No, numbers are numbers. Truth is what you do when nobody's watching. Truth is keeping your word even when it costs you." Ryan shook his head. "I don't expect you to understand, but that's how we are. We don't leave our people behind." Vorithsek thought about this for a long time afterward. The Valanthe would never make such a choice. A wounded soldier who slowed the group would be left behind. It was logical. It was correct. But somehow, when Ryan said it, leaving someone behind seemed like the wrong answer. He found Captain Morrison in his quarters, reading reports. The captain looked exhausted. His eyes were red, and his hands moved slowly. "Commander," Morrison said. "More questions?" "One question. The same question I have asked everyone." Vorethsek sat down without being invited. "Why do you fight like you do? Your tactics are inefficient. Your losses are severe. Yet you continue. Why?" Morrison set down his reports. He was quiet for a long moment. "Did anyone ever tell you what humans used to be?" he finally asked. "I have studied your history. Then you know we weren't always at the top of the food chain. Long ago we were prey, small, weak, slow. Everything wanted to eat us." Morrison leaned forward. "We survived because we were too stubborn to die. We couldn't outrun predators, so we learned to outlast them. We couldn't overpower them, so we learned to outsmart them. And eventually, we became the predators." "This does not answer my question." "Yes, it does. We fight the way we do because fear is in our blood. Every human feels it, every moment of every day. We're afraid of the dark, afraid of being alone, afraid of death. We're the most frightened species in the galaxy." Vorethsek did not understand. "Then how do you function?" Morrison smiled. It was a tired, sad smile. "Because we learned something. Fear doesn't have to stop you. It can drive you. When a human is afraid for their family, they become dangerous. When we're afraid for our homes, we become unstoppable. You removed fear from your people. We turned it into a weapon." Vorethsek sat in silence, processing this information. "There's another thing," Morrison added. "Something we call spite. I do not know this word. Spite is when you keep going, just to deny your enemy satisfaction. When you refuse to die, just because something wants you dead. When you fight, not because you can win, but because you won't give them the pleasure of seeing you quit." Morrison's eyes hardened. "The swarm wants us to die. So we won't. Simple as that." Vorethsek returned to his quarters and sat in the dark. He thought about everything he had learned. The Volanthi had believed that removing fear made them stronger. They had believed that emotion was weakness, but the humans had shown him something different. They felt everything. Pain, loss, grief, terror. They felt it all. Constantly. Every moment of their existence, and instead of being crushed by it, they used it. Fear made them protective. Grief made them remember. Anger made them fight. Love made them sacrifice. Every emotion the Volanthi had eliminated, the humans had turned into strength. Vorethsek looked at his hands. They had stopped trembling, but he could still remember the feeling. During the battle, when human ships were exploding all around him, when the swarm seemed endless, when even his logical mind had calculated near certain death, he had felt something, a quickening in his chest, a tightness in his throat, a desperate desire to survive. The Volanthi scientists had not removed fear completely, they had only buried it. And now, after millennia of silence, something was waking up. Vorethsek was afraid, and for the first time in his life, he did not want the feeling to go away. Because the humans had shown him that fear was not the enemy. Fear was proof that something mattered enough to be afraid for. He began to write a new report. Not for the hegemony. For himself. A record of everything he was learning. Everything he was becoming. He did not know where this path would lead. But he knew he could not turn back. The crack in his walls had grown wider. And through it, light was beginning to shine. The assault on Hive Prime began at dawn. Not that dawn meant anything in space, but the humans liked to start their battles with a beginning. They liked symbols. Vorethsek had learned this about them. 300 ships moved toward the living planet. Hive Prime was not a world in the normal sense. It was a mass of flesh and metal. Twisted together over millions of years, the Swarm Queen lived at its heart. Kill her, and the swarm would die. This was the plan. This was the only plan. The Volanthi had calculated a 12% survival rate. They considered this acceptable. The humans had calculated the same odds. They had volunteered anyway. Vorathsek stood in the drop bay with Sergeant Kyle Bennett and his squad. They were preparing to land on the surface and fight their way to the Queen's chamber. The mission was suicide. Everyone knew it, but the humans checked their weapons, made their jokes, and prepared to die. "You didn't have to come with us," Kyle said to Vorathsek. He was a big man with a scarred face and kind eyes. "This isn't your fight. I am here to observe," Vorathsek replied. "I cannot observe from orbit," Kyle smiled. "Whatever you say, Commander. Just stay close and don't die. My squad has a perfect record for bringing everyone home." "I'd hate to break it." The dropship launched. Vorathsek felt the violent shaking as they entered the atmosphere. Around him, humans were quiet. Some prayed. Some held hands. Private Megan Torres, the youngest of the squad, was writing something on her arm in ink. "What are you doing?" Vorathsek asked. Megan looked up. She was barely 20 years old. Her eyes were bright with fear and determination. "Writing my parents' address, in case they find my body and want to send it home." "That is morbid. That's realistic." Megan smiled. "But I'm not planning to die today. I just like to be prepared." The dropship hit the surface hard. The doors opened, and the squad poured out into hell. The surface of Hive Prime was alive. The ground pulsed like skin. The air was thick with spores and screaming. Swarm creatures were everywhere, pouring from holes in the ground, dropping from the sky, emerging from the walls. Kyle led his squad forward. They moved fast and hit hard. Vorathsek followed, firing his weapon, doing what he could. He had been in many battles, but never anything like this. The swarm was endless. For every creature they killed, 2 more appeared. They reached a tunnel entrance and dove inside. The walls were covered in organic material that seemed to breathe. Strange lights pulsed in the darkness. The squad pushed deeper. 2 kilometers to the Queen's chamber, Kyle said, checking his scanner. "We can do this." They fought for every meter. The squad lost 2 soldiers in the first 100 meters, then another in the second. By the time they were halfway, only 6 humans remained, plus Vorathsek. Then the ceiling collapsed. Vorathsek was thrown backward. When he opened his eyes, he was alone. The tunnel had caved in, separating him from the squad. He could hear fighting on the other side, but he could not reach them. He was alone in the dark. The fear hit him like a physical blow. His heart raced. His breathing became fast and shallow. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold his weapon. This was not the small fear he had felt before. This was terror. Pure, overwhelming terror. He heard movement in the darkness. The swarm had found him. Vorathsek fired blindly. His shots lit up the tunnel in brief flashes, revealing nightmares. Creatures with too many limbs. Mouths filled with teeth. Eyes that reflected no light. He ran. He did not know where he was going. He did not care. He only knew that he had to move. Had to escape. Had to survive. The fear controlled him completely. He was no longer a commander. He was prey. He ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed against a wall and waited to die. The creatures would find him. They would tear him apart. There was nothing he could do. Then he heard a voice. "Commander. Vorathsek, where are you?" It was Kyle. He was calling through the darkness, searching for him. "Here," Vorathsek gasped. "I am here." Minutes later, Kyle emerged from a side tunnel. His armor was damaged. He was bleeding from a wound on his head. Behind him came Megan and 2 other survivors. They had fought through the collapse to find him. "There you are," Kyle said. He actually smiled. "Come on, we're not done yet. You came back for me." Vorathsek could not understand it. "You should have continued the mission. I am not essential." Coming back for me was tactically incorrect. Kyle grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet. "I told you. My squad has a perfect record. Everyone comes home. But the mission matters. But you matter too." Kyle looked him in the eyes. "We don't leave people behind." Not ever. Now move. They pushed forward. The Queen's chamber was close now. They could feel her presence, a pressure in their minds. The swarm creatures became more desperate, more numerous. They reached a narrow passage. On the other side was the chamber. But the passage was filling with creatures. Someone would have to hold them back while the others got through. Megan stepped forward. I'll do it. No, Kyle said. You're the best fighter we have. You need to reach the Queen. Megan checked her weapon. I can hold them for 60 seconds. That's all you need. Megan, tell my parents I wasn't scared. She smiled, and her eyes were wet. Tell them I was brave. She ran toward the passage entrance and opened fire. The creatures turned toward her. Kyle grabbed Vorithsek and the others and pushed them through. Vorithsek looked back once. He saw Megan standing alone against the tide. He saw her fall. He saw her get back up. He saw her keep fighting even as they overwhelmed her. He saw her lips move. She was saying something. Maybe a name. Maybe a prayer. Then she was gone. They reached the Queen's chamber. The Queen was massive. A mountain of flesh and hate. Kyle raised his weapon. A special charge designed to destroy her. For Megan, he said quietly. He fired. The Queen screamed. The sound was everywhere, inside their heads, shaking the walls. The swarm creatures throughout the hive began to die. Without their Queen, they were nothing. The mission was complete. Vorithsek stood in the dying chamber and felt tears on his face. He touched them in wonder. The Valanthi did not cry. It was not possible, but he was crying anyway. For Megan. For all of them. For everything he had lost without ever knowing he had it. Kyle put a hand on his shoulder. Welcome to being human, he said. It hurts like hell, but it's worth it. Vorithsek said nothing. There were no words for what he felt, but for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be alive. The war was over. The Queen was dead, and without her guidance, the swarm had collapsed. Across the galaxy, the mindless creatures wandered and starved. In a few years, they would be extinct. The threat that had united two species was gone. Vorithsek stood on the observation deck of the Relentless and watched the stars. He had stood in this same spot months ago, when he first came aboard. He had been a different person then, a different species, almost. The Hegemony High Council had summoned him. They wanted his report. They wanted to understand why the Alliance had succeeded when their calculations had shown failure. They wanted to know the truth about humanity. He had written his report. It was the most difficult thing he had ever done. The door behind him opened. Captain Morrison walked in and stood beside him. Beautiful view, Morrison said. It is adequate. Morrison laughed. You know, you've changed. When you first got here, you would have said something like, the visual stimulus is irrelevant to mission parameters. Now, you just say, it's adequate. That's almost poetry for you. Vorithsek did not reply. He was thinking about his report. I heard the Hegemony wants you back, Morrison continued. Big promotion, probably. You'll be a hero for what you did down there. I will not be going back. Morrison turned to look at him. What? Vorithsek finally faced him. I have submitted my report. I have also submitted my resignation from Hegemony service. And in 5. I have submitted my resignation from Hegemony service. Why? Because I cannot be what I was. Vorithsek looked out at the stars again. I have felt fear. I have felt grief. I have felt connection. These things cannot be unfelt. The Hegemony will want to study me. They will want to fix me. I do not wish to be fixed. Morrison was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What will you do? I do not know. Perhaps I will travel. Perhaps I will study. Perhaps I will simply exist and feel things for a while. Vorithsek paused. Unless there is another option, such as, I have learned that humans value those who fight beside them. I have fought beside your crew. I have bled with them. I have wept with them. He turned to face Morrison fully. Is there a place for me here? Morrison smiled. It was a real smile, warm and wide. Commander, there's always been a place for you here. We were just waiting for you to ask. The ceremony was held 3 days later. It was a human tradition, a memorial for the fallen. Names were read aloud. Stories were told. Tears were shed. Megan Torres, Danny Vance, all the others, who had given everything. Voreth Sek stood among the humans and listened. He had never attended such a ceremony. The Valanthi did not mourn their dead. Death was simply a mathematical outcome. Bodies were recycled, names were archived, life continued. But this was different. The humans did not simply remember their dead. They celebrated them. They laughed about old jokes. They cried about missed futures. They promised to carry the fallen with them always. When it was his turn to speak, Voreth Sek walked to the front. He had prepared remarks in the logical Valanthi style. He set them aside. I did not understand you, he said. When I first came aboard, I thought you were weak, emotional, inefficient. I thought your fear was a flaw. Your tears were a waste. Your attachments were a tactical error. He paused. The humans watched him in silence. I was wrong. I have spent my entire life believing that strength meant the absence of feeling. The Valanthi conquered fear by eliminating it. We became perfect warriors by becoming less than alive. We removed everything that made existence meaningful. And we called it evolution. His voice broke slightly. He steadied himself. But you showed me another way. You feel everything. Pain, loss, joy, love, terror. You feel it all. And it breaks you. And you keep going anyway. You do not conquer fear. You carry it with you. You use it. You transform it into courage. He looked at the pictures of the fallen. Megan's smile. Danny's laugh. Megan Torres saved my life. She did not do it because I was valuable. She did not do it because of calculations or duty. She did it because that was who she was. A person who cared. A person who chose to matter. Voreth Sek touched his chest, where his hearts beat. I felt terror for the first time as I warred alongside humanity. And I finally understand why the galaxy should fear you. Not because you are strong. Not because you are smart. But because you have always been afraid, and you have never stopped fighting. He stepped back. The silence lasted only a moment. Then, the humans began to clap. Some were crying. Some were smiling. Kyle Bennett walked up and embraced him. That was beautiful, Kyle said. Megan would have loved it. I hope so, Voreth Sek replied. She deserved better words than I can give. Later that night, Morrison found him on the observation deck again. He handed Voreth Sek a small metal pin. It was a human symbol. 2 hands clasped together. What is this? Voreth Sek asked. It means you're part of the crew, officially. Morrison smiled. Welcome to humanity, Commander. It's messy and it hurts, and nothing makes sense. But you're one of us now. Voreth Sek held the pin carefully. It was a small thing. A bit of metal with a simple design. But it weighed more than anything he had ever carried. Thank you, he said. Morrison nodded and left him alone. Voreth Sek attached the pin to his uniform. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. He looked almost the same as he had when this all began. Same gray skin. Same tall body. Same expressionless face. But inside, everything had changed. He had come to this ship to observe and report. He had expected to find primitive creatures struggling through warfare. Instead, he had found a family. He had found courage. He had found a reason to feel. The Valanthi would not understand. They would see his emotions as contamination, his attachments as weakness. They would say he had been corrupted by humanity. Perhaps they were right. But as Voreth Sek stood beneath the stars, surrounded by the distant sounds of humans living and laughing and crying together, He knew something the hegemony had forgotten. Fear was not the enemy. Fear was the beginning. Fear meant you had something worth protecting. Something worth fighting for. Something worth dying for. The humans had taught him this, and he would carry their lesson with him forever. He touched the pin on his chest and smiled. It was a strange expression. The Volanthi did not smile, but he was not entirely Volanthi anymore. He was something new, something afraid, something alive.